awaiting us today. This event, Build Africa After 50, Building on Recent Development Progress, I think to some extent reflects something of a kind of groundswell in optimism around African development progress. And if you've been sort of tracking the publication of sort of major reports on African development over the last few months, I think you will agree that there is definitely a shift in tone around some of those major publications, whether it's the 5 years on from the Africa Commission report, the McKinsey Global Institute report on Lions on the Move, or even a recent article in The Economist, beginning to tease out some of the characteristics of a changing development landscape across the African continent. This event today gives us an opportunity to think about that progress, to sort of ask some questions about, well, how are we defining this development progress? What is driving it? What is explaining it? And what, if any, are some of the lessons we might want to learn from it that are transferable within the African continent, but also beyond? And we've got a fantastic lineup here of speakers to help us address those questions. But because I've got a lot of people around me, I'm actually going to introduce them in two chunks. I'm first going to introduce the two main speakers who are going to, in a sense, put forward the case for thinking about Africa on the move. And the first speaker, who we're delighted to have over from Washington, is Punam Chuhan-Pole, who's a lead economist in the Office of the Chief Economist of the Africa region and has been leading a major initiative within the Africa region, looking at, analysing and seeking out examples of development progress, and is at this moment putting together much of that material in a book that will be published by the World Bank in June called Yes, Africa Can, which is another, I think, really good example of where this sort of wave of optimism is leading us at the moment. And Punam's going to start off by giving us some of the insights from that work that she's been leading in the bank, and quickly followed by a presentation by Lisbeth Steer, who is a research associate here at ODI, but actually based currently in Washington, who has been leading an initiative that we've been running now for a good 18 months or so in ODI, looking at questions of development progress, and that work has been supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and is coming to a culmination at this very moment. And she's going to speak a little bit about what we've been learning through that initiative, about how we understand progress, how we talk about progress, and some of the lessons around sustainability and scale in thinking about development progress. So we're going to have two presentations first, and then after that I will introduce the range of discussants we've got who are going to help us flesh out perhaps some of the arguments and before we open it up to discussion. So with no further ado, over to you, Punam, and are you going to use the podium? Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alison, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad to be here. It's a wonderful topic that we are discussing today. The study that we are doing at the World Bank in the Africa region is Yes, Africa Can, Success Stories from a Dynamic Continent. And that should be coming out in June. So I'm delighted to be here to be able to talk about the work that we are doing. In today's presentation, I want to focus on two aspects. One is discuss the recent development that we have seen in Africa. Recent is over the past decade or so. And then the second issue that I want to look at is some of the success stories that we've been working on and documenting, and what we are finding in those success stories. So, just before the global economic crisis hit, Sub-Saharan Africa was enjoying over a decade of policy improvements and strong sustained growth. growth averaged about 4.5% in the period 1996 to 2008, and actually accelerated to nearly 6% in the period 2003 to 2008. And this contrasts with growth of under 2% in the period 1978 to 1995. So clearly we see, you know, a difference in the growth performance. And what is interesting is that this growth.
Oops.
Sorry.
There we go.
I will figure this out. That this growth has been fairly widespread. You'll see that more than 20 countries, which are non-oil exporters in Africa, had average growth rates of over 4% in the period 1998 to 2008. So not only has Africa experienced high and sustained growth, we also find that it is pretty broad-based. And this rapid progress in growth has also been accompanied by improvement in other economic performance. You see that inflation rates fell sharply in 2000 to 2009, and they are below the double-digit inflation rates that were common in the 1980s. Also, the private sector has shown a fair amount of dynamism. Exports have been growing, and foreign direct investment has also been coming to Africa. Now, a good amount of the foreign direct investment is in the extractive industries, but more and more we are seeing that it is going to a larger number of countries. And in terms of greenfield investment, there is investment in manufacturing and in the service sector, especially in telecommunications, banking, and transport. Now, along with a decade of sustained and accelerating growth, we find that the poverty rate has also declined, and there's been progress in human development. Poverty has actually fallen, the poverty rate from 51% in 1995, from 59% in 1995 to 51% in 2005, which is almost a 1 percentage point decline per year. There has also been rapid progress in primary school enrollment. We find that there's been a 14 percentage point increase in the primary enrollment rate to 73% in 2008 over the 1995 period. And along with more children going to school, we also find that more children are completing primary school. The gender balance has also been improving both in primary and secondary level. And even child mortality rate, which had been stagnant for some time, has begun to decline. Of course, much remains in the health area, including in terms of reducing maternal mortality. But the idea here is to show you that there has been progress, and in some areas there's been rather rapid progress. Now, the crisis, when the global economic crisis hit, Africa was impacted. Growth slowed down sharply from, as we were looking, from close to 6% to under 2%. But what is remarkable is that African countries have shown a great amount of resilience, and growth has actually rebounded. It's estimated to be about 4.7% in 2010, and is likely to be above 5% moving forward in 2011 and 2012. Now, looking at this, one could say that African countries are well positioned for economic development and transformation. But some of the things to watch out for is that there are long-term development challenges in the region. And some of these are the large infrastructure deficit that African countries have, as well as lagging productivity growth in agriculture. Although after stagnating for several decades, agriculture has started showing improvement in terms of productivity. There are also other issues in terms of service delivery. There is absenteeism in schools, and Africa is also struggling in terms of improving governance and getting a handle on corruption. So although things are looking favorable in terms of moving forward, there are long-term challenges, and for countries to sustain long-term growth and for transformation, they will need to address these issues. Now, one of the things that we are doing in documenting the successes is looking at this period where there was remarkable growth and transformation to see what we can learn from these successes. And we find that the African landscape is actually dotted with impressive achievements. We were able to identify over 50 successes, and those are by no means complete, and I'm sure people who are working in that part of the world will have many more to add to the ones that we have on our website. And actually the idea is that successes are not, in a sense, stagnant. Countries that have been successful over a long period of time might change, and what looked like successes maybe 10 years ago may not. It's a dynamic process, and one needs to be aware of that. But nevertheless, we find that there are impressive achievements across the continent in a broad range of countries and across sectors, and both at the micro level and at the macro sectoral level. In the study that we've undertaken, we have 25 case studies that are being prepared, and many of them are already on the website, and you might have had a chance to see them. The idea of the study is to be able to learn from these successes. Each success, of course, has its own variation, and there is no one size fits all. However, there are lessons that one can learn and be able to sort of see where there are opportunities to scale up, either within countries or across countries. And the other aim of the study is to engage a broad audience in development issues, both in Africa and across the wider development community. So briefly, what do the successes tell us? One, as I said, is there's a lot of diversity in the case studies. So that means, suggesting that there are many ways to overcome development challenges, and each country and each situation will depend on the context. But there are some common things that come out of these of the study of these successes, and they illustrate that these are mostly policy successes. In cases where the policies have corrected what we know as either government failure or market failure. Now, market failure you're common with. It's basically when markets cannot deliver public goods because they cannot price them appropriately. So there is insufficient provision of public goods, as well as conditions where there could be a monopoly. So it's not efficient production of and allocation of resources. Now, market failures can be corrected by either the provision of public goods by the government or by non-market entities, and they could be corrected also by taxes and subsidies. The other kinds of failure are government failure. And what do we mean by government failure? Here it is when governments have stepped in to correct, say, a market failure, and in turn have induced policy distortions that actually lead to worse outcomes, so more inefficiencies. And those are the kinds of failures that we notice in many of these case studies, that when countries were successful in overcoming those policy-induced distortions, they were able to unleash growth and development. Another type of government failure could be when the government steps in thinking there is market failure when there isn't. So those are the sort of issues that we see coming out of these success stories. And just to illustrate some of the case studies that we have, and this is just a subset, in terms of either overcoming what you could call massive government failure or bad policies, or avoiding bad policies, the examples that I have highlighted for you here today are the case of Rwanda coffee sector, where by removing barriers to trade and abandoning price controls, the government was able to create incentives in the coffee sector to unleash growth and to lead to better quality of coffee. Another example is in the case of Kenya, where the government in the early 1990s liberalized the fertilizer market, and which led to the increase in use of fertilizer for the production of maize, and by use of fertilizer by smallholder farmers. Another good example is the case of Ghana, where liberalization of the exchange rate and macroeconomic stabilization led to the revival of the cocoa sector. And finally, I highlight the case of Tanzania, where the government undertook in stages deep structural reforms with macroeconomic stabilization to spur Tanzania's growth takeoff. Another kind of case, so that was where the government stepped in to undo what were policy distortions. Another case, type of cases that we see are where governments successfully intervene to correct a market failure. For example, to provide a public good, which can then unleash private sector development. And some of the examples we found, which are really quite interesting, is the case of Mali mangoes, where the government, working with others, was instrumental in developing a multimodal transport system to overcome infrastructure constraints, so as to link Malian mango farmers and producers with markets, global markets. Another case is in Lesotho, where the government was able to provide infrastructure for the apparel industry to help Lesotho increase exports rather dramatically under US AGOA. We also have we analyze a case of gorilla tourism in Rwanda, where protection of gorilla reserves and conservation has actually boosted tourism and tourism revenues in Rwanda. And finally, there is the case of the ICT revolution in Africa, where the government basically got out of the way and let the private sector get in there, and the rest is history, when it comes to the ICT revolution. We also find that there are cases where the governments and including NGOs and donors tried policies which hadn't worked in the past, but when they tried them again, they actually were listening to the people and getting their input in terms of, these are the stakeholders, these are the end users or our clients, and listening to them so as to be able to adapt either technology or to adapt policies which could either lead to sort of better innovation, a greater focus on results, and or more accountability. I won't touch on these because I think Elizabeth's going to pick up on them. How are we doing time-wise, Alison? Okay.
2 minutes. I'm
going to quickly go through one or two case studies, and you'll have them in the handout. And please do go to the website. It's on the World Bank's website. Transforming Rwanda's coffee sector. This was a very interesting case study. For many years, we found that Rwanda's coffee sector was stuck in this low quality, low quantity trap. It was heavily regulated. There were very little incentives for farmers to innovate or to produce the kinds of quality products that they might want to. After the genocide, the government removed a variety of these barriers to trade so as to create incentives for producers to shift to higher value kinds of products, such as fully washed coffee. And substantial reforms began in the sector in 2000 as the National Coffee Strategy moved to capture a larger share of the specialty coffee market. And the result has been that farmers now have an incentive to shift from the lower quality semi-washed coffee, for which they got much lower prices, to fully washed coffee in order to earn both higher prices and higher incomes. And as you see that the price of coffee beans has been going up, the higher quality beans has been going up quite dramatically. We also find that more entrepreneurs are willing to invest in building coffee washing stations. And coffee washing stations have in turn created new jobs for people. Rural communities are also forming cooperatives so that, giving farmers more knowledge, more information, and sort of more power in terms of trading, and relationships with buyers and exporters. And finally, Rwandan coffee is increasingly recognized as high quality product, which, for those of us who go to Starbucks and I guess fair trade, we find the coffee that is really good. There is a case of liberalization of the fertilizer market in Kenya, and I'm talking about the period through 2007, from the early 1990s to 2007, where the government stepped in and liberalized the fertilizer market completely, took out price controls. There was removed fertilizer import quotas, and basically let new entrants come into the market. And the result has been impressive, in that the consumption of fertilizer has actually doubled. The use of fertilizer has actually doubled between 1992 and 2007, including by smallholder farmers. Also, maize yields have gone up, and this despite the fact that total land area used for maize production was essentially stable. And we also find that margins between wholesale world price of fertilizer and prices in the sort of more remote areas have declined dramatically, showing that there's more competition. So this is a case where the government liberalized, got out of the market, and let the private sector actually take off and create markets for input markets in fertilizer. I'll just go through one more, and then I think Lisbeth can pick up on some of the other ones. This is the case of growing Mali's mango exports, where the government, this was a case of more market failure because there wasn't adequate infrastructure. Mali, being a landlocked country with very poor infrastructure, was not able to benefit from the global demand for mangoes. But by using innovative ways to bridge that gap and to look for a multimodal kind of transport which would link up with roads, rail, and sea, they were able to actually work with the government was able to work with private sector, with donors, including the World Bank, to come up with a strategy that would overcome the infrastructure constraint and logistics, and be able to link up farmers to markets in Europe. I'm going to stop there.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Punam. Lisbeth, thank you.